but they mutually bisect at right angles. So the vesica Pisces is a seminal construction, right? It's a very important construction. And it turns out to have a very long history in what might be called esoteric or sacred geometry or philosophical geometry, right? And part of that is here, one fragment of it is here, where this same figure, starting with these same three circles, and you see them here, and there's the triangle in it, and there's one axis and there's the other axis. But by continuing this kind of construction, you can construct any polygon. Any regular polygon. A regular polygon is one that fits inside of a circle. All the vertices touch a circle. So you can construct any one because basically these two arms here are radii. This is a radius, and these two are also radii, and it's just a question of how far out they're going to turn. Right? So you can see in the square, they're all at right angles. In the pentagon, they've turned a little further, and they're governed by a third circle, actually. And then we can continue this, and I've done these up to, I think, I don't know, 13 or 14 or whatever sides. You can get them all. They're kind of tricky, and they're not. Some of them are not provable, and they're sort of esoteric. Let's see if I can go on. Okay, now behind this Euclidean thing, there's a creation story, and one of the concepts of what's called logos, right? I went to this philosophical conference. For some reason, I knew what I was going to get, but I went anyway. This was this Greek philosophers' presentations. They had like 100 papers being read or whatever and stuff. So I went to a bunch of these things. Well, I shouldn't even.
Where was it?
I was at Fordham uptown Manhattan. Anyway, but behind these geometries, there's a whole esoteric system, really. And this slide kind of represents a Pythagorean creation story, right? That uses geometry. Now, what I was going to say about these Greek philosophers was that there were a number of papers that I attended that were on the subject of logos, right? But they had so butchered the meaning of the word that it didn't mean anything anymore. So these guys are reading papers about logos meant absolutely nothing. I had no idea what they were talking about. It was incredible. Logos to me means a story, and I'm getting this from a source called Theon. It's a story of creation that's told either in words or in numbers. It can be told in words or numbers. So in other words, it's a creation story. Right? A logos is in effect a creation story, or it's a means of creation. Right? It's kind of a tool that's used to create. And there's a story that always goes with it. The story can be told in words, that is to say a myth, right? Or it can be told in images. So conceivably it could be told in paintings, but it could also be told geometrically. So this is an attempt to synthesize a kind of geometrical creation story that I'm getting from various sources that are identified as Pythagorean. And it has basically four stages. Everything that comes into existence has a point or a place of beginning. Right? But the point, as we'll see, is a mysterious entity. It's not exactly what we take it for. And it can't, since the point is defined by Euclid, we'll see in the next slide, I think, the next slide, we see that the point is defined as something that has location without dimension. It has no parts, they say. Now, this already means it's a kind of transitional entity. It's like an imaginal entity of some kind, because if it has no dimension, it can't be part of the physical world. Everything in the physical world has to have a dimension. Right? There are no two-dimensional objects in the actual physical world. They only exist in the imagination. So the point has to do something in order to become a cosmos. The point has nothing inside, but it's the seed of everything to come. It has everything inside of it in potential, even though it has no dimension. Right? So it's like the seed contains the flower in potential, right? But the flower is much bigger than the seed, and why did the flower get in the seed, right? The point has to inflate, basically. Right? Now, I don't, there's a lot of ways to approach that aspect. But if you want to have a cosmos, you have to have an inside and an out. You have to have something that can contain something, right? In the original, actual Greek story, they call this the chora. This circle here would be called the chora. The chora is the space that the universe takes place in, the space that space takes place in. If that makes any sense, but space where space is. So now this is going to be the universe from here. Now, before anything else can happen, there has to be
the word Quora.
Quora, K-O-R-A.
Transliterated C-H-O-R-A.
I think is it C-H-O-R-A? Yeah, C-H-O-R-A. They also spell it K-O-R-A.
No, I'm curious. I never heard like the classical meaning of Quora. One of the meanings, anyway, in sort of ordinary usage, is the surrounding countryside that's under the control of a city, the territory.
Yeah, well, it's not inconsistent.
That's interesting.
It's not inconsistent.
Yeah.
But it is. But I believe Plato uses the term somewhere. I don't remember how they translate it. But it's in the Timaeus, I think. He uses that term. I think they translate it as nursing, coming, or something like that. It's a really.
The round out of which we come.
Yeah, it's the bubble. Later we'll see it's the bubble that the Egyptians and the Kabbalists feel it starts. Anyway, so but before anything can happen, there has to be a differentiation. Right? All our perceptions, all our ideas, all our thoughts, whatever, based on differentiations. So there has to be a differentiation, right, somewhere. And that's represented by the two circles, and it's represented by a line, right? So in the Old Testament story, it says, in the beginning the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the abyss. So there's an undifferentiated area in here. That's what's meant by the darkness on the face of the abyss. The abyss is the reference to the waters. The waters in Egypt are the Nun, and the Kabbalists have another name for it. I forget what they call it. But it's the chaos.
Something like Tofu, something like that.
What is it?
Begins with a T, I think. Tofeto, something like that.
Okay, I don't remember, but no, it's the Nun. I think is it the Nun?
What's in
the
Egypt,
ocean,
yeah.
the vibratory ocean. Anyway,
oh well.
It's the undifferentiated stuff. There's no differentiation. So first there has to be a differentiation. And in the Old Testament, it says, "Let there be light." That's the first thing that the divine being says, or the divine creator says, is, there's darkness on the face of the abyss, and he says, "Let there be light." Right? So this is the light. This is the ray. Right? Now, in the Greek, the early Greek story, the Orphic story, there's an egg. Right? There's a cosmic egg, right? And the egg cracks, right? And what comes out is called Phanes. But Phanes means light, right? So let there be light. Right? It's the same story, it's just told differently. It's the same thing in the Corpus Hermeticum, right? It's the same story of creation, except the ending is a little different. And to which the Italians were not shy about. That's what they were into, was it has a different ending, right? Instead of the world being the punishment for the act of love, the world is the act of love. Very Italian ending to the story. And I think that whole thing was they were trying to have an end run around Christianity. And that's why the church cut it off at a certain point. They realized they couldn't do it. So anyway, and it's the same thing that happens every time to the same system gets cut off every time. They get it in the Middle Ages, they get it in the ancient world, they get it in the modern world.
Just when you start to have fun.
Just when you start to have fun, somebody cuts it off. Right, exactly. Nixon, it was Nixon. But anyway, for my generation, it was Dick, tricky Dick. So, all right. So, but when you have these two sort of polarities, right? The first differentiation is a polarity of some kind, because there's the divine, and then there has to be some kind of movement away from it, right? So it can't really be totally a good thing, but on the other hand, it's not a bad thing either, because we wouldn't have the universe to sort of live in if we didn't have that step. So you have to have it. And this is kind of the Tai Chi. For those who can see it here, you see that. That's the dark Tai, and then we got the two dots, right? So this is the dyad, and the dyad is unstable. The dyad and the Tai Chi, they have the things that are moving around one another, and they're flipping back and forth, right? Because the little light has the dark, and the dark has the light, so they have the potential to flip back and forth, and that's in a never-ending progression. So in order to have a cosmos, in order to take a further step towards a cosmos, you have to have some kind of structure. You have to stabilize the dyad, and in the symbolism here, we're doing it through the triad, right? By adding a third circle, you frame out that triad. Okay, so now you have a structure. You have something stable. And this is the foundation of psyche. This thing later becomes psyche. We'll see in a later slide. And it becomes the Trinity in Christianity. It's the good, the true, and the beautiful in Platonism. The expressions of the one, right? The minimal expression of the one is in the three. Okay, not in the two, it's in the three. I mean, the two is important, but the two is always considered with the one. So they're never really talking about dualism, right? Sorry,
That's okay, go ahead.
Tell me to stop when I'm killed enough or whatever. So then the final step, but this is still not the physical world yet, because it's only two-dimensional, right? It's a plane. planar structure. There are no actual planes in the physical world. You have to have three-dimensional structures. You actually have to have four-dimensional structures, but that's another story. Not the Greek story. So here in the final stage, we have the tetrad. Right? The tetrad represents manifestation. It's the final step into the physical world, the appearances, and of course, it forms the cross. Right? Religiously speaking, it forms the cross. Here, of course, if we, reverse that, we have the Hebrew symbol, and if we stretch our imagination a little bit, if we take the point here, and we take that, we have the Islamic crescent and star. So all of the three major religions and Taoism, just a good measure, can come right off these diagrams. So I think this is kind of a synthesis of like Pythagorean thought about number, and it's a story that they could have told. I don't know that they actually told the story literally in this way, but they certainly could have. And then down here are a series of correspondences. They're a little bit small to read, but we have the four stages. We have the titles, monad, dyad, triad, and tetrad. And the stages of coming into being are unity, division, structure, and then manifestation or matter. And then in the Timaeus, Plato assigns the four elements to these stages of coming into being. He also assigns them to the what are called the Platonic solids, and I'm not going to really talk about that today, but basically fire, air, water, and earth in that order. And then there are four now in the Platonic system of knowledge, basically, or in the Platonic system of teaching, as it comes out later. There were 7 subjects, right? These are called the 7 liberal arts, and again, they were the basis of education right up until the early 20th century when they got dumped. And they were the 7 subjects. There are 3 verbal subjects. There's grammar, rhetoric, and what was called dialectic. Right? Now this gets changed later to logic, but that's already a diminution of the whole thing. Dialectic is more significant than logic. Logic is the tool of dialectic. Dialectic is the point of the exercise, and it's fascinating that Aquinas cut it out. Right? Aquinas turned it into logic because it's safe. You can teach logic, but you can't teach psychic, elevation. Right? That has to come from your own self. Okay, so then there are four numerical subjects, okay, and they are arithmetic, which I call number here, geometry, music, interestingly enough, was considered an arithmetical subject or a mathematical subject, and astronomy was also considered a mathematical subject. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but that was the way they did it. And each of those 4 subjects, in turn, has a you can see has a 4-part structure. So in geometry, you have point, line, plane, and solid, which we just went through. In music, you have the 4 fundamental tones of the Greek octave. I'm not even going to go into that, but it's too much for right now. And then in astronomy, this is my own synthesis really, you have light, dark, and what I'm calling the gnomon, and then you have orientation. What this means, basically light and dark are conceptual. The gnomon is the vertical stick that you put in the ground, okay, and it casts a shadow, okay, and you gain knowledge. Gnomon and gnosis have to come from the same root, okay. So it's knowledge, and the knowledge you get is the knowledge of orientation. Orientation means knowing where you are in the universe, right? And it's very important. It's a very early thing that comes out, and without this kind of stuff, you couldn't have farming, right? I don't think you can have farming without it, because you don't know where the bodies are. If you don't know where the bodies are, you don't know when to do things on the ground, because what's going on above is cueing you for what's going on below, right? And this must have taken many centuries or even millenniums to develop this knowledge, right? Came up over thousands of years. Finally, people learned how to plant things, right? There's a lot on that, but it's very interesting, but it's not for us. So okay, so this is kind of a structure of knowledge. This is all underneath Euclid, right? Now here's this progression. This is the actual geometrical creation. Again, it's another kind of geometrical creation. Point, line, plane, and solid. And here they're expressed a little differently than they were before. I'm not drawing the circles, and I've used a what is it, tetrahedron, I think it is, yeah, instead of a cube to represent the solid. And this is the first thing you read in Euclid. This is page 1, line 1, definition 1. The point is that which has no parts. Now, when I actually had to write something on this at one point, and I looked through it, and I started reading Heath. Now, Heath is the translator of Euclid in the early 20th century translator, and we still use this translation. And he quotes Aristotle first, saying, by first principles, that is to say, this here is the first principle, right? This is the first principle. He says, by first principles in each science, I mean those the truth of which it is not possible to prove. And that's a very categorical statement. Very categorical. He doesn't say they're not proven. Right? He just says it is not possible to prove the initial principles of any science. Whoa. Now wait a minute. We're supposed to believe in science, right, today? Science is the whole thing, right? The whole book is all science, right? But it turns out that at the bottom of everything, of any science, of any rational study, there are assumptions about the universe that cannot, not that aren't proved, that cannot be proved. Cannot. Because we cannot prove that this exists. We simply cannot prove that the point exists, or the line, or the plane. We can prove the solid exists.